For decades, every president has faced the same quiet embarrassment. State dinners that outgrow the White House. Guests walking through rain, temporary tents, temporary fixes, a permanent problem no one wanted to touch. Now, Donald Trump wants to end it with a ballroom so large it could reshape the White House itself. Supporters call it practical. Critics call it reckless. But the real story isn't about chandeliers or square footage. It's about what happens when a long-ignored problem finally meets unchecked power. Because this project doesn't just solve a logistical headache. It tests the guardrails of process, oversight, and restraint. It asks whether efficiency is now more important than deliberation, and whether getting things done has quietly replaced doing things right. If you care about how power changes institutions, not in theory, but in concrete and steel, stay with me. Because the ballroom is only the surface. The real structure being rebuilt lies beneath it. For most Americans, the White House is a symbol, a place of ceremony, of continuity, of limits. But behind the symbolism sits a very real operational constraint. The East Room holds about 200 people. Anything larger breaks the system. That limitation has shaped diplomacy for decades. Presidents host foreign leaders knowing the building cannot host them properly. So the solution became improvisation. Tents, temporary kitchens, damaged lawns, six-figure bills quietly absorbed by the State Department. No one denied the problem. They simply avoided the solution. Why? Because any permanent expansion forces a harder question. How much can you change an institution before it stops being what it was? That question lives at the center of this controversy. Not whether a ballroom is useful, but whether the process of building it still respects the idea of constraint. The White House argues this is modernization. Critics argue it's normalization of speed over scrutiny. And once speed becomes the standard, the rules that slow power down start to feel optional. To see why that matters, we need to look at how this problem was handled before. For years, the federal government studied this exact problem. Quietly, methodically, often without fanfare. The National Park Service commissioned reports. Architects explored alternatives. Planners asked the unglamorous questions. How big is big enough? Where should it sit? How visible should it be? What does it do to the historic balance of the grounds? Those studies produced options. Some kept the East Wing intact. Some placed new structures farther from the executive mansion. Some reduced scale to protect sightlines and symbolism. And then, almost every time, the process stopped. Not because solutions didn't exist, but because advocating for them carried political risk. Any president pushing for permanent construction risked being accused of ego, legacy building, or disrespect for history. So restraint won, delay won. The system worked in its own frustrating way, until it didn't. Because history shows us a pattern. Institutions manage problems not by solving them, but by containing them. Until a leader arrives who values resolution over restraint. That moment didn't come from a new discovery. It came from a different attitude toward limits. And once that shift occurs, what had been unthinkable suddenly becomes inevitable. Then came the rupture. Not a debate, not a proposal, but a demolition. The East Wing, a space occupied by first ladies for decades, was torn down with little warning. No public process, no extended consultation, just action. For supporters, this was decisiveness, proof that something was finally happening. For critics, it was the moment the project crossed a line, because normally this stage comes first. An information presentation, options on the table, alternatives weighed, feedback gathered before anything irreversible happens. Here, it came after the fact. Foundations were already being poured, below-grade work already underway. And only then did the project arrive before the National Capital Planning Commission, not for approval, but for introduction. This is where procedure becomes substance. When oversight bodies are asked to comment after choices are locked in, their role shifts from guardian to spectator. That is the first crisis. Not the size of the ballroom, not even its cost, but the quiet realization that the process designed to slow power down is being asked to catch up instead. And once that happens, the next question isn't what will be built, but who still has the power to stop it. To understand why this moment matters, you have to look beneath the surface. Because the ballroom isn't really the story. The mechanism is, at the center, is a shift in how authority is exercised. Oversight still exists on paper, but its function has changed. The National Capital Planning Commission was designed to evaluate, challenge, and refine. Its power came from delay, from asking inconvenient questions, from forcing alternatives into the open. That mechanism only works when outcomes are uncertain. In this case, uncertainty has been removed. Commission members were replaced. Experts in architecture and preservation gave way to political loyalists. The vote count became predictable before the questions were asked. This is how systems hollow out without formally breaking. No laws are repealed. No rules are abolished. They are simply bypassed by momentum. Speed becomes the justification. Efficiency becomes the virtue. And scrutiny becomes a nuisance. From the outside, everything still looks procedural. Meetings are held, documents are filed, but the outcome is already baked into the concrete. That is the hidden mechanism at work here. Power no longer needs to persuade. It only needs to proceed, and once that logic takes hold, it doesn't stay confined to a ballroom. The second shock came as the scope of the project became clear. Trump envisioned a 90,000 square foot ballroom, nearly twice the size of the executive mansion itself. A building of unprecedented scale, classically designed, imposing. Supporters frame it as a solution. No more tents, no more damaged lawns, permanent kitchens, space for state dinners and grand receptions. Critics see something else, a symbol of ambition overriding tradition. Costs rising from $200 million to $400 million, demolition already done, architect replaced, loyalists installed on oversight boards, and the timing, construction is already underway, even as the information presentation occurs a stage usually reserved for discussion of alternatives. This is Mini Crisis #2, a high-stakes clash of scale, power, and precedent. The ballroom itself is not the only story. It is a manifestation of momentum untempered by deliberation. And the consequences are about to ripple outward, touching those who live in and visit the White House and everyone watching how the rules bend. For everyone who steps onto the South Lawn, the impact will be tangible. No longer will guests balance high heels on soggy grass or shuffle past temporary kitchens and grills. No more tents that cost hundreds of thousands only to leave the lawn scarred. For staff, planners, and first families, this is relief. A permanent indoor space solves a problem that has frustrated generations. But for the public, for observers, the ballroom is also a lesson. It shows how power can move efficiently when restraint is discarded. It shows how rules, oversight, and tradition can be bypassed in the name of function. For you watching, it raises a question: what happens when expedience outweighs deliberation? When getting things done replaces doing things right? The ballroom is more than a building. It is a mirror of priorities, values, and the cost of speed. And beyond the lawn, beyond the parties, its influence stretches into politics, precedent, and perception. The ripple doesn't stop at the South Lawn. The ballroom touches the world beyond Washington. Diplomats, foreign leaders, and global media see a White House transformed. A structure so large, so permanent, it signals power consolidated and unrestrained. The symbolism is clear: efficiency over tradition, action over deliberation, function over process, This sends signals to allies and adversaries alike that the US presidency can act quickly, but also that checks and balances can be softened when expedient. Geopolitics is often subtle, communicated through posture, timing, and presence. And a ballroom, a space for ceremony and diplomacy, becomes a statement of the kind of leadership that is in charge. It is here, at the intersection of infrastructure and influence, that the East Wing's reach extends far beyond its walls. And as the eyes of the world focus, we are left to ask, how will this change the way power is perceived and exercised in the years to come? Looking ahead, the future of the East Wing Ballroom is not a single story. There are three paths, each telling a different lesson. The optimistic path: the ballroom functions as intended, state dinners proceed smoothly, historic grounds are preserved. Process adapts, oversight strengthens, and precedent balances innovation with caution. A rare success where efficiency and prudence coexist. The middling path: the project is completed, but controversies linger. Lawsuits continue, oversight is weakened but not absent. Functionality is gained at the cost of scrutiny. A cautionary tale of what happens when speed dominates process. The pessimistic path: oversight is permanently eroded. Future expansions or alterations follow the same model. Procedural norms are bypassed as default. Power is concentrated and public trust diminishes. The building itself becomes a symbol not of hospitality, but of unchecked authority. Each scenario carries lessons about systems, governance, and the delicate balance between action and restraint. And it is here, at this crossroads, that the real stakes of the East Wing expansion become clear. The choices made now will echo far beyond its walls. And so we arrive at the conclusion, the insight this story offers. The East Wing Ballroom is more than a building. It is a mirror of power, process, and priorities. It reflects what happens when long-standing problems meet decisive action. When oversight is reshaped and momentum becomes the ultimate authority. For you watching, the lesson is clear. Efficiency can be seductive, expedience can override deliberation, and even institutions designed to slow power down can be bent if the will is strong enough. Yet, there is hope. Scrutiny, lawsuits, public attention, they still matter. Checks may be bypassed, but they are not erased. And the final call to action is simple. Watch closely. Ask questions. Remember that the structures we build, physical, procedural, and symbolic shape, not just what happens today, but the rules that govern tomorrow. Because the story of a ballroom is never just about a ballroom. It is about how power moves and how we choose to hold it accountable.